You have entered the AquaBrain. I'm your Virgil Drew. On today's show, we're going to talk urban gardening. Joining us again in the brain, Anthony Geyman. How the hell are you, Anthony?
Hey man, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Yeah, it's awesome. So this is number 2. I got a little bit. Yeah, that's right.
No, let's keep it going.
My gardening buddy.
That's right.
Cool. Well, hey, so you work in AV, and I know we talked about that in our last show. Anybody who didn't see it, it's the links right here. Yeah, getting fancy.
Yeah, go back and fact check me.
Yeah. So AV is that how's it looking out there in your world?
Yeah. So AV means audiovisual services. It's like events and conferences and stuff like that. For those of you who don't know, obviously with the pandemic happening, it was one of the first industries to get shut down pretty much early March. So I haven't worked until March. I think my last work date was March 19th, which gave me an abundance of time. But I'm happy to say that there is some work on the horizon, that I'm actually going to work tomorrow for the first time in like 7 months. I'm very excited.
Wow. Awesome.
Very curious, going to take all the safety precautions. It'll be a new world of adjustment, but I personally am excited to get back to work and to see some old faces and friends. And
that's awesome. Do you want to give a shout out to the company that you're going to work with, or?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's funny. I have one of the privileges that one of my employers happens to be my father. And so Avalon is one of my employers. And so he's the first person naturally to get us back to work. So
that's awesome.
Thanks,
yeah.
Dad.
Big shout outs to Avalon.
That's awesome. Right. That's right.
It's good to hear that you guys are still doing it. That's awesome, man. Weather the storm.
Well, there were some big question marks, and I mean, there really still are, but some of the companies are starting to allow to have like small scale meetings and streaming events and things like that. And that's where we can kind of come back in and start setting up. So hopefully we'll continue down that path.
Believe it or not, to have a streaming event, you wouldn't know it from this show,
right?
But there's actually a lot of infrastructure that still does need to happen. You still need techs there. And it's a good way of kind of keeping those events, does that feel, getting information out to your employees and stake, what's the word? Stakeholders.
Sure. Yeah. The way I think about it is we'll go to work so that y'all can stay home, and that's kind of the idea, where it's like, all right, if 20 of us have to go to work to put a show on so that, 1,000 people can stay home, but still stay connected.
Yeah.
All right. We can do that.
Yeah. Gladly, happily.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So,
a
little AV update in the world, but really the reason got you back on is to talk gardening.
Yeah.
And,
talk food.
Let's talk food. So last you were on, you had some goals for the summer. And, of course, being a good host, I've got a list of those goals right in front of me. So,
I'm sure they're written down right in front of you. You went back and watched our episode.
Exactly.
You're like, I know everything about it. Yeah.
So, was there anything? Yeah, obviously that's not true. I'm not that prepared. So was there anything that you going into the summer wanted to work on your in your what are we going to call it? What do you like to call it?
I call it my garden. I mean, I recognize, for those who haven't seen the last show, it's a rather large space. I'm on roughly 6,000 square feet here, but anything that's not the house is pretty much put to purpose for growing food. There's 12 4x8 raised beds, a big old 8x20 greenhouse, and a permacultured landscaped like 2,000 square feet space out front. And so all of those things have already been established, for those who remember. And I can't remember if I had any direct goals. I think going into every season, my goal is to kind of become more efficient, more effective, to make sure that what I grow gets utilized and used. And I think when we did our show, it was well before any of the pandemic had really started to pick up steam. So I had expected that I would have work alongside of the garden at the same time. Now, the way that it worked out was I have an abundance of time that became very available to me. And so maybe in that moment, I set a new goal of just like, well, I want to see how much I can actually do with the space, you know, with full
Very cool.
intention and effort, where I have like all the time in the world.
Yeah.
How much can be grown, how much can be produced, how much waste can be reduced, you know, because
Very nice.
oftentimes, and I think people who have grown food before experience it, where it's like you grow all these things and they're perfectly available in this one little window, and if you don't get them in that window, they go past, and you're like, well, I don't want to eat a bean that's too crunchy, or a squash that's too big, or tomatoes that started to split, and then they go to waste, and not truly waste. I mean, they go back to nature, but you
Sure.
don't get to eat them in your garden, to your kitchen. And for me,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
just like, all right, let's try to reduce as much of that as possible. And so having the availability to be home and really up close and personal with the space allowed me to do that this year. And I think I feel like our house was pretty wildly successful at just truly, especially during the summertime, eating everything that our garden was producing.
Yeah. So, what did you learn? Are there any tips that you could share?
Yeah, I like time is the biggest thing. You know, it's like we all have lives that usually get in the way when they're not there. I think the intention and the effort is pretty easy. What I actually kind of learned, I mean, granted, this is a small space by most large scale standards. It didn't take as much time as I thought it would.
Huh.
Like I needed to be available, but the actual amount of time to go out there and check on things was really no more than, you know, 5 to 10 hours a week once things were rolling. So you're kind of just maintaining once you get things fired up in the spring. I think the spring is the most laborious time. You're getting your starts going, you're direct
Yeah.
seeding things, you're starting to plan out your timetables for when other things come in. And you're kind of trying to track pests as your plants are young and most vulnerable. But once it gets going, I mean, it's kind of a jungle out there, and you're just kind of following the harvests, you know. On top of vegetables, there's a lot of established fruits and berries on the property as well. And so those start to
Very
come in
cool.
season. And so it's like as they become available, you start to focus on that. I would say maybe the learning experience was just recognizing that it is maybe a bit easier than I thought it would be to do the full, you know, the full garden experience, meaning to maximize it to its full potential, at least for this space. Now, if I had more space, I don't know what I'd do.
Yeah. It sounds like just committing to the commitment, right? So
Kind of.
instead of watching binge watching the next episodes or whatever on Netflix, I'm going to go in my garden. I'm going to put out that 20 minutes, an hour that I have instead of sitting on the couch. At least that's what I hear you saying. It wasn't a lot of time once you got it going, but it's almost like during that spring, you need a couple weeks really to dedicate to it
Yeah, I think
potentially.
the upstart's definitely big. A lot of the larger harvests tend to come, you know, in the summertime as well. And if you have a side job, it's not only just finding the time, I mean, it's quite literally finding the energy as well. You get home and you may not want to go outside and like
Yeah.
dig in the dirt for 2 hours, even though you know
Right.
you love it, and
Yeah.
it's gonna feel good when it's all said and done. You're gonna have this bountiful harvest, and you're gonna be healthy and happy. But sometimes mustering that energy gets to be a little tricky. So yeah, I think I resonate with what I recognize to be a true, you know, farm to table lifestyle that certain people live, where it's like they truly live off of their land, they truly run their farm. They oftentimes have side jobs where you're like, yeah, like you can see how much energy and time and dedication it would take, because I think that there's probably many days where you're just like, after you come home from your day job, your home job is literally keeping the homestead up, you know.
Yeah.
It's and that harvesting, that weeding process, you know, it's like the continual planting and planting. I bet it gets exhausting. I think that's a realization that we have to recognize, that it's like it's a lifestyle, but it doesn't make it easy, right?
Right. So here's a little nice, very
Yeah.
nice.
Up close and personal with the microphone.
Right. Hello, my friend. Um, so here's a little game we can play.
Mhm.
Let's say full schedule, right? So what you're used to, not this new situation. I almost used one of those catchphrases I'm not going to use. So let's say, a couple
Pandemic
years,
world. Yeah.
couple years back, right? A couple years back, you take your normal year, you're busy at certain times.
Mhm.
So let's say we go back to something like that. What kind of changes are you going to make? to try to keep maintaining this? Does that scenario make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I would be lying if I said I committed a lot of thought to what it would be like to return to normalcy,
Sure.
because I think myself, like many people, have just resigned ourselves to the lack of normalcy moving forward.
Right.
But no, I mean, if I went back to work full time and I was still maintaining the garden as I intend to do, I think that just recognizing that it's okay to take time, and what I mean by that is my job pays me to be there and I need that money to like make my life, run.
Right.
This is the capitalist thing, right?
Sure.
And so once in a while, just taking maybe that extra day off a week, or maybe even just 2 days out of the month, and dedicating it to the garden, so that when I can get things up and rolling. And in our industry that can be tricky because usually we're tied to a gig, which can be 7 or 8 days in a row. It's not as though you can just pick and choose, but
Right.
making that more of a priority. And then honestly, sucking it up. And when you get home at 8 p.m. in the middle of the summer and you're tired because you worked 10 hours, like, well, you still got to go outside and maybe do some harvesting so that that food doesn't go to waste for an
Yeah.
hour. Yeah. And I think that that's just the realization of knowing that it is still work. It's a pleasure and it's rewarding, but it's still work. It's labor.
Well, and it definitely pays off, right? If
Oh,
you,
100%. Yeah, and you're happy to have it. I mean, I've never came out of the garden with dirty hands. And for me, it's like I'm always touching my face, which is just like what I do. And I'm out there and my hair's down and I look like a wild animal. I
right.
come in and there's just like dirt caked into like my forehead and hair. And you go and you take a shower and it all washes off and you're like, I feel really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's the land, it's part of that lifestyle, and it has its benefits as well. I'm not going to list off all the benefits, but I know that there are many benefits to. I don't know if your skin, maybe you have some idea of what maybe some of those benefits might be.
Yeah, I think health and happiness. I think getting outside is really important, especially for people like myself, whose job is primarily indoors, moving around each day. I mean, there's a lot of like bending and squatting and lifting and using muscle groups you don't expect. The food itself is reward enough. If it were
Right.
just the food alone and how delicious and healthy it is, I mean, that would be it. But there's all these like secondary things that you start to discover from the process, including just, I mean, and this is the woo-woo part, but it's like feeling tied to the land that you belong to, like feeling like you are a part of that process, not just owning it, not just living on it, but really cultivating it and changing it and shaping it both to like your needs and its needs.
So do you think that has an effect on your mental well-being? So like, let's say you're in a really tough situation, and look, we're all experiencing these tragedies in our life, right? And on
Sure.
all this emotional stress and emotional strain. Do you feel like gardening has advantages, or you know uh animal husbandry, or do you feel like that helps your mental state?
Oh, absolutely not. Yes, of course it does. Yeah. No, I mean, let's be real,
I'm
it's
good
not
at
just,
this, guys.
yeah, it's not
Really.
just that it's not just that I enjoy it. The reasons I enjoy it is because it's good for me, because it puts me in a positive place, right? So it's like I don't think that the positive interaction I get is because I was just born loving to grow food and like dig in the dirt and pull weeds. I think that that process is somehow natural for us as human beings. Like being tied to the land is very normal for us. And I do think that you get a lot out of it. And it can be a little bit, right? It can be a couple garden beds, but watching that like take shape, that kind of like constant and also impermanence is a good reminder of how the world works, outside of our systems and structures as humans, but just naturally the world ebbs and flows, changes happen, it's like things grow, things die, we continue to cultivate and adjust and adapt. And you do that with your garden. And I think that there is something to be taken away from that is almost kind of calming. I often find that like when I'm in the garden, the thing that I'm focusing on is almost nothing. It's really just the process itself, and anything that can get you to that point, to where
Right.
the external world is just kind of in the background, can be really helpful, because it's hard to do that. It's, you've got this thing attached to you the whole time, and it's hard to disconnect. So if you can find that thing that gets you there, I think that it's a benefit for sure. For me, it's gardening. For me, it's hiking and backpacking.
Yeah. Have you were you able to get out and do any of that?
Hiking and backpacking, yeah,
Yeah.
a little bit here and there. Definitely the day hikes and things like that. Yeah, it's beautiful in the summertime here. I've had an abundance of time, so yeah, I've been able to kind of like stay within my bubble of people, but get out and go hiking, and it's fantastic. It brings me a lot of joy and happiness.
What was one of the highlights?
Well, I go back to one place every single year. It's funny because I mean, you lived here. I don't know how much time you spent, going out into the
Tons of
mountains
time.
or hiking.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Raised in them. Yep.
yeah, so it's like we're blessed with a wide variety of landscape and mountains and waterfalls and alpine lakes. But every single year, I like to go back to one specifically. It's near Mount Rainier. It's the Spray Falls area near Mowich Lake. And
Okay.
it's just on the north side of the mountain. And I think that I started going there when I was just younger. I mean, this is like 8 years in a row now that I've gone.
Wow.
And it kind of just starts to feel like my little place,
Yeah,
And
like a little home away from home kind
yeah,
of.
and so I always try to get out there once a year just to kind of like check in, to like have some tea or eat lunch in front of the waterfalls, and then go on a
Awesome.
little. Yeah, so it starts to kind of feel like my thing, and I use, yeah, every year there's someone else that goes with me, and so they become a part of that process as well. And
It's very cool. Yeah,
yeah,
actually, growing up, there's a lake called Found Lake. It was
mhm,
as kind of a pilgrimage for um, my dad and brother and his friends and you know, and it was a gentleman in the Forest Service that used to work. It was my dad's college friend, and they stayed hiking buddies and everything. And so he actually did some work or found out about it. Grew up in Concrete, so this is like in that area
yeah,
outside of um, oh, what's right past Concrete? What's
you tell me. Yeah,
where it turns? Anyway, uh,
it's out there.
so
There
anyway,
are maps if anybody
this
wants to know.
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean this is no this is not for the faint of heart. This is definitely you're going there and you want to spend a couple of days there because it takes a
a lot
lot
of
of
effort to
effort
get
to
up
get
there.
there.
Yeah,
um but I know exactly what you're talking about. You start to feel this connection, or even if it's been a couple of years and you get up there, or in your case you've gone every year, once you're up there, you're like, oh yes, like there's just it's like maybe you don't even realize that that part of you is missing, but when you're up there, you're like, yes, I know why I come back here, kind of a
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I've experienced that feeling. I've talked about that feeling with a lot of other people who enjoy backpacking and hiking too. It's a real experience for sure.
It is definitely. And ladies and gentlemen, go out and just, even if it is just a day hike, you for a view, or if you want to fish a lake or see a waterfall, it's an amazing experience. And I think everybody is it's a part, like you talked about, being connected to the land as being kind of a natural like thing that we have a connection to. I think that is also another thing, is getting out and taking a deep breath and kind of hearing the birds and the wind going through the trees and stuff like that. It's good for the soul.
Absolutely. Couldn't
Good
agree
for the
more.
soul. So all right, so we're going into fall.
Mhm.
What and that I know there's a lot of cleaning up the garden, planting crops. So what do you got going? What are you doing?
Yeah, yeah. The fall's an interesting time around here. It kind of changes each year. It can be really sunny and almost like an extended summer, and then other times it feels like what spring is, which is just gray skies and rain the whole time.
Yeah.
And so that process kind of means that you're adjusting in general, but a lot of what have available in the springtime is suited to be grown in the fall. And the tricky part about getting ready for that is you really have to start thinking about it at the end of summer. You know, if you're getting new starts kind of set up in a nice shady spot when it's still 70, 80 degrees outside, they need to be ready to go into the ground when it starts to get a little chillier, when it starts to get into that 60-degree range, and you know, maybe even mid 50s at night like it is right now, as well as direct seeding things. So part of it is kind of making this evaluation, because you have beds and spaces that are already planted, maybe things that are finishing out, like your tomatoes and your peppers and squashes and beans and the kinds of greens that are available in the summertime. You're starting to see them go to seed, and you want to pull them out of the way so that you can start direct seeding, like your radishes and your peas, and maybe getting carrots. Maybe you're getting like late fall onions as well, and things like that, in anticipation of trying to extend the harvest, not just through the fall, but into the winter as well.
Yeah. Are you planning any overwinter crops like garlic and stuff like that?
So, yeah, sort of. So this would, like, the fall time specifically is where we're in October here now. This is about the time where you start to think about putting in garlic for next spring, as well as maybe potentially, if you mulch and protect them, onions as well. Your carrots can be the same thing. We're really blessed with a pretty temperate climate here. We don't really get below freezing very often, and in raised beds, when you do, it doesn't have quite the same dramatic impact unless it's really a hard freeze to kill things off. So a lot of it is just allowing what you've kind of cultivated, you know, it's like your brassicas, those kales and collards and some of your greens, to just kind of mature and continue to like harvest from them. And then establishing some of those things you might hope that, you know, will be there come springtime, so that you have some early things to harvest that aren't just more peas and greens and radishes, which is what everybody gets, you know, in the early spring.
Yeah.
It's kind of just trying to balance that out in terms of what you hope to get and what you can mulch and save, you know, protect from the cold, and then what you know will be successful, which are these really truly hardy plants. And in our climate, that they'll almost go the whole season through.
So what, just so everybody knows, you're in the Seattle area.
Mhm.
I can't remember if we said that at the beginning. But you're in the Seattle area. What is zone? What is the zone?
Yeah, so my zone specifically is 7A, down in Tacoma. And so that is a very fairly temperate zone. Like I was saying, we don't get very many hard frosts. Our fall season stretches well into November, which for those of you who live like kind of in lower in the United States, that won't be possible or true. And so you need to then explore ways of like protecting your plants, either through mulches like straw or clutches, you know, things that can kind of create little environments and atmospheres over your plants so that they can kind of stay warm while things get almost too cold for them outside. Here, it's kind of a grab bag. We really don't get too cold until almost January. And at that point, you know, things are kind of the sunlight is more of an issue than anything else that's inhibiting growth here, because we only have that minimal bit of sunlight that comes through. You know, maybe you're looking at like 8 hours a day, and only like 4 hours of direct sunlight. So nothing's growing very rapidly, although it is still maintaining itself throughout that time.
Yeah. Very interesting. So I've got raised beds here, and we're definitely, we hit a freezing. So I mean, it's already cold in the morning. Not
For sure.
freezing. I haven't had to scrape frost yet. I think we're a little early, but it's coming. So what are some advice that you could give somebody with a raised bed that's going to have a more frosty winter?
For sure. Yeah. Picking smart plants for that environment is going to be really helpful. Things like kales, especially, are very cold tolerant. I mean, when I say very, it's like some of these varietals will like still continue to grow through snow, assuming that they're not so packed in that they have no sunlight, right?
Yeah.
And I would say with raised beds, the beauty of it is you already have a structure that you can kind of build upon. And so creating a little mini hoop house to go over the top of your raised bed is incredibly easy. It's as simple as really establishing a couple, you know, hoops of PVC with just like 9 or 6 millimeter plastic, as clear as it can be, over the top. And that'll just help the sun will heat up the air in there. It'll extend the season and the harvest for your plants. And I mean, just build one of those for each of your raised beds. And I mean, it literally sets in, you know, you can anchor them if you want, depending on how windy it gets around your area. And the only thing you got to pay attention to is if you get heavy snows, going out there and making sure that it doesn't collapse and then crush your plants.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a crapshoot here. We're kind of at a little bit lower elevation. I mean, we're at a higher elevation than you, but we're at a little bit lower elevation. So it tends to heat up once it snows. But we do get, as opposed to Seattle, who we might get like two snows a year.
Yeah, at
maybe,
best, for sure.
We're looking at more like 4, 5, 3 to 5, and if it does stay cold, it stays around for a little bit.
Sure.
Especially if you don't have any sun on it. Right. So like my front yard, because I'm crazy like this, I build a ramp so I can snow skate in my front yard.
Cool.
So I shovel my driveway all into one spot, and then I can build like a roll in, and it's not a hill really in my front yard. It's just sloped enough, but that ramp will stick around for a long time. Like I'll have that ramp. It might not be usable, like once the run out, or whatever goes away. But yeah, that snow, because it's in the shade, so it just anyway. So I guess why I mentioned that is that I've been thinking about trying to do something with my front yard, and it's hard to really commit to something because I know that it does that in the winter, that it's just shaded and so I haven't done anything. I've killed the grass.
Sure. I mean, that's fantastic.
The grass is dead.
I think it's okay to evaluate, like, how much are you really going to be able to grow over the winter time if you're going to make that effort, because it's an effort, right?
Yeah.
And there's only a limited number of plants that, even with those hoop houses, depending on your zone, are going to have success. Mostly it's leafy greens. Maybe it's like some peas and some radishes, right? And you're going to run into different issues because you've got this closed environment that's very kind of humid because the moisture is trapped in there. No. The sun's heating things up kind of arbitrarily. You're going to run into some more pests that you wouldn't have to experience, and molds and mildews might occur. So it's more or less just being like, well, it'd be nice to have something, and then kind of just evaluating and putting a couple little things in and just trying it out. Like, it's like start with one bed, one season, see how it goes, and then see if it's as easy as you thought it would be, and if it's worth the effort of constantly removing this thing to harvest and checking on things. It's like having to knock the snow off if it snows. Like, you may not want to do that in the winter time, but if you do, you'll be blessed with some fresh food, coming straight out of your yard in the middle of December and January, which is cool, right?
Can't complain.
Yeah.
So last time we talked, and it just dawned on me that, and we were talking about unintended consequences. Well, actually, we weren't talking about that, but kind of, because you said, well, being in the industry that you work in, you've had a lot of time off. So you've been able to devote a lot of time to your garden. So I actually built a couple raised beds since we talked. So
that's great, man.
I can't remember. I think so. I had my berry raised bed, which is weird. I got to ask you about that. I got a question for you in a minute, but
okay.
I built a big raised bed, another one. It's not, I just did one board, so it's not like the 2 board, you know.
It's not like a foot, it's just 6 to 8 inches.
I mean, but it's cool. It was a good project. And then I also did I cleared an area that I thought I was going to put the raised bed, and as I was digging down, because we've got clay. I know we've talked about this in the last episode, but here in Boise, it's clay. It's So I was breaking it up. Well, I found out that in the spot that I wanted to put the raised bed, there's like a junction of my sprinkler system, and there's like so I ended up finding like a bunch, a couple tubes and a junction, and it's like,
Yeah,
oh
always
man.
call before you dig, folks.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, so I decided I'm not going to put the raised bed there,
Mhm.
but I'd already broken up all this ground. So what I did is I spread a couple like seed packs that were combination packs for the area that were pollinator flowers. And so
Nice, just like a
I've got,
wildflower mix.
yeah, I've got this great like flower garden, but they're all just natural flowers.
Yeah, and
It's
those
really,
blooms are probably like they're a lot worse to look at than grass, right? Like just looking at grass would be so much more enjoyable
well,
than
right.
seeing these beautiful flowers. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm sorry you have to experience that.
Well, I know when I look out my kitchen window, it's terrible.
Yeah, like I just wish there was a big splotch of green out there. Instead, there's a rainbow of colors. Yeah.
Yeah, any grass that's left is pretty much like orange, tan orange.
Good. You have to leave a
Whoops.
little bit, that way you can just go out there and stomp on it once in a while. You know?
Well, it's been a blessing in disguise. My sprinkler system has been broken for a couple of years, so that helps, right? When you're not watering your grass, it's gonna die. Go figure.
Who knew?
So I've got this berry bed. I call it my berry bed. I've got 3 blueberry plants in there, and then I've taken strawberry plants and kind of planted them around in there.
Very smart.
The strawberry plants are, well, so here's the thing with the clay soil, or I guess clay, I'm not even going to call it soil, it's clay ground. It was killing my blueberries. So I took these blueberries that I had that were just thriving in Washington, in Western Washington, and brought them here, and then they just started like, what is this? I can't.
Like, what the fuck, dude?
Yeah, exactly. So I had to make this more acidic berry bed. So here's the thing. I planted them the first year, and they actually all the plants gave me berries. They weren't huge and they weren't like super succulent, whatever, but they all gave me berries. This last year, I got 2 blueberries off of all the plants. So that was it.
Yeah.
I got 2 total. Now the strawberries are going gangbusters. I'm out there, like my little daughter's out there, like picking them, and then gets on her little 4-wheeler and like does another lap, and then goes and picks more strawberries and stuff. So blueberries, any thoughts? I'm seeing I pruned a lot of stuff. I had this, like scorching on some of the branches, and maybe, so let me just say that I got this berry mix. I don't know if it's shells or it was something I bought from the organic store,
Kind of like
and I
in the soil a
sprinkled
little bit.
that. Yeah, and I sprinkled that around the base of the plants. Now I've heard that actually could have done some of this damage.
It could have. Yeah, what you're describing there is commonly referred to as nutrients burn, and what that means is, depending on the kind of fertilizer or amendment that it is, if it is directly in contact with the plant, if you got some on the plant itself, or really closely in contact with the roots to where it's getting too much at once, that can cause what you're describing, which is this kind of like brown, crusty, like rusting of the leaves. And it's literally the plant like just taking in way too much of one thing at one time, and it throws its whole chemical imbalance off, and it's like, this isn't what I really want or need. This isn't how like my world's supposed to work. I'm struggling. Now that could be it, right? It could be related to your watering. It's a number of different things. The problem with like, this is the thing about plants, it's like, the problem is one symptom. You're like, I have brown leaves, can mean 7 different things, and ironically it could mean like 2 different things on the same spectrum. You're like, well, you're overwatering or you're underwatering. And so part of it is knowing like what that spectrum is, recognizing like you did, and saying, yeah, okay, well, I did this thing, like I introduced these nutrients to its root system, and maybe it needed to be water soluble. Maybe it needed to be more well integrated into the soil so that it wasn't just like full nutrients on top of the root system and then getting absorbed. Maybe it's a watering issue that you then try next year. The thing is I think that you made a smart choice by amending your soil, recognizing that fruiting plants especially need certain soil composition, meaning certain kinds of nutrients to help them to fruit, because the things that help them grow, meaning creating their stalks and their leaves, it's not the same nutrients that it gets from the soil that helps it produce fruit. Part of it is the sunshine process, but it still needs calcium, it still needs phosphorus, and it still needs potassium, things that are not necessarily going to be present in your soil composition, right? This is where it's like when you start a garden bed from just like pre-built soil, it's got all of those things in it, and it'll kind of diminish over time. When you're planting directly into already established soil, especially the kind of soil you'll find like in a lawn or something, it's not usually the most nutrient dense soil that you can find. Now, the thing that I would recommend more than anything is mulching around the plants that you put in the ground, especially if it's old soil. Mulching, for those of you who don't know, it's simply applying like a thick layer of organic material. It can be wood, bark, and chips for things that are already like fruits and trees. It can be compost for things that are like vegetables. It can be like a thick layer of leaves or straw. And what that does is it slowly breaks down over time, and it helps feed both soil composition and nutrients back to the plant. It literally mimics basically what is already available in the environment, which is like a forest floor of leaves and twigs and plants slowly breaking down. And so it could help solve that issue that you're having with just like, well, I could use these kind of chemical fertilizers, but it might hurt the plant initially. Or you could just simply start mulching through the season and see if it has an effective change. I know one thing it'll do for you is it'll start to shift that clay to more of like a loamy medium, meaning like this kind of fluffier soil consistency, at least in the top layer. And if you work that into the soil, as it breaks down, it'll become better. Blueberries love wood mulch. A lot of plants, like your annual vegetables, won't, because when wood mulch breaks down, it's got so much carbon, it pulls nitrogen from the soil in order to help it balance and break down. But blueberries don't necessarily need too much of that. They actually like the soil structure and the nutrients that they get from the breaking down of the wood mulch. And it also helps usually increase the acidity, which the blueberries certainly don't mind.
So what do you think about the strawberries I put in there? Are they gonna like the wood mulch as well, or do I need to?
Yeah, I found that they don't seem to mind. In my permacultured space out front, I have, like 60 or 70 strawberry plants. I do a balance of leaves in the spring and wood mulch in the fall. And I go back and forth between those things. And all my fruits and berries seem to love it. The strawberries certainly don't seem to mind. Strawberries tend to be fairly resilient. And again, they don't need a ton of nitrogen. They just need enough to get big enough to start storing that sunshine and creating that delicious fruit that your daughter loves so much.
Yeah. And you know what's awesome about that is that it's quite a ways off the ground, and the slugs and all that, like earwigs and all that stuff have been avoiding them, which is
good. It's harder to get to.
Yeah, which is really cool. I like that.
Raised beds they're fantastic. It's such a simple process, but it does, I think, make a lot of what you're doing run smoother.
Well, and they're an initial investment, right? They're a little bit, financially, it takes a lot of soil to fill that. And I learned that the hard way too. I'm like, man, I bought a lot of bags of soil to build this. But definitely worth it in the long run. And I think that did add a lot to it, was just dumping, because I put that stuff right on the base of the plant, and I wasn't well, I either was or I wasn't liberal, whatever the definition of that is. I put a lot. We'll just say I put.
Yeah, you're like, oh gosh, I need extra nutrients. I better put extra.
Yeah,
and ironically, that can run into the issue. I think it's it's like anything, right? It's a little science and a little alchemy. It's like, which do you want to play with here? I mean, I tend to lean on I'm going to read and do what it says. If it says 2 tablespoons per, like 6 square feet,
yeah,
probably stick to that. But you certainly didn't kill your blueberries. You
I
might,
eyeballed it.
yeah, you might have, you might have hurt your harvest for this year.
I
And
did.
at the very least, you've learned from that experience to know that fertilizers, especially, have to still be maintained and respected. They're not exactly the same. Even the composition of the fertilizer being chemicals and synthetic or organic material will affect the means in which it needs to be applied to the plant safely for the plant, also frankly safely for y'all. So yeah, definitely like pay attention to what fertilizer you have and how to use it appropriately. Disseminate it so that it's not concentrated, but rather just fully integrated into the soil, because that's what your plant wants to do. It wants to get these things slowly. So as the rain falls, it sinks those nutrients into the ground, and then the roots pick them back up.
Yeah, man, Anthony, you are a wealth of knowledge, my friend. Thank you for joining me in the brain.
Of course. Yeah. It's great to be here. I mean, let's do this again. Let's make it a regular thing. We'll keep talking plants and garden, and I don't know, maybe your viewers can send in some questions. We'll do a mailbag at some point.
You know, that's I'm glad you brought that up, because there's some things in the works, website, some other things in the works. So we're definitely going to grow the show.
Cool, man. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. Can't wait to do it again.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell so you know when we put new videos out. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Brain Aqua. This has been AquaBrainTV. Remember to keep your head up and keep those knees bent.